Welcome to the presentation. I'm Zhongquan, and I'm focused on bug hunting and fuzzing in Android, IoT, and Apple products.
I'm Shidan, and my ID is Flanker. I'm the director and the chief security researcher of the Down Security Lab of JD.com. And I mainly focus on the security architecture and bug hunting of mobile and cloud-native security. I will do a brief introduction of our lab if you haven't heard about it. And our lab, the Down Security Lab, is the security lab of the information security division of JD.com. And we have found more than 200 CVEs in Google, Apple, Samsung, and Huawei, and etc. Our members consisting of previously Pontoon and DEF CON CTF winners, and we won the Pony Award 2022 for the best privilege escalation, the Mystic Bug. And here's our Twitter and our blog. If you're interested, you can have a look there. Okay, I will switch to Montreal.
Okay. I was focused on Android bug hunting, and I switched from Android to Apple for vulnerability research because of the better vulnerability disclosure policy and higher bug bounties. And the most important thing is I built a system using AFL and Unicorn to simulate and fuzz Android trusted applications. By building a custom Cisco API, it can be adapted for macOS and iOS. So my goals are simple. I want to analyze and exploit macOS userland vulnerabilities to identify fuzzing targets. And I want to bypass all user space security mechanisms to gain full control of the computer. Now, over 40 logical vulnerabilities have been discovered since July 2023. I planned to disclose 16 vulnerabilities, but Apple responded that they cannot fix them all. So I have to omit some details in this presentation. First of all, we need to talk about some security protections on macOS. The first one is SIP, aka rootless. As we can see here, it can limit the actions that the root user can perform on protected parts of the macOS. For example, it prevents modification of system files and disables unsigned kernel extension loading. The second one is TCC. TCC works similarly to Android permissions. We need to apply for them when needed. And general TCC bypass vulnerability is more valuable than userland root LPE. So my goals are simple. I want to achieve RCE and LPE. I categorized the remote attack surfaces on macOS into these 3 different ways. In this presentation, I will focus on the third one. I will try to use a malicious document to achieve RCE. It means I need to escape from the Office sandbox. In section 2, I will introduce a general application sandbox escape approach. On macOS, if we want to escape from the application sandbox, we have 3 different ways. In this presentation, I will focus on the third one too. I will try to escape from the application sandbox by launching a fully controlled non-sandbox app. This is the simplest app structure. We only need to create the hello.app contents macOS folder and place an executable file under macOS folder. macOS supports different executable file formats depending on the chip architecture. And in this talk, all POCs tested on Intel MacBook. So if you want to test them in OnBook, you may need to do some little changes. Actually, macOS has some security protections on this attack surface. Any file modified by a sandbox app is assigned the quarantine attribute. Quarantine prevents harmful files from being executed or opened without user consent. Quarantine contains 4 parts, and I believe the most important part of quarantine is the first part, quarantine flags. If we download a file with a Safari, the file will be tagged with quarantine attribute. If we try to launch the quarantined app, Gatekeeper blocks its launch. We need to go to system settings to allow the operation. After we click the Open Anyway button, a new dialog pops up. We need to click the Open button once again. After this, the app finally launches. System Policy daemon adds its quarantine flag with 0x40. So the next time when we launch the user-permitted app, System Policy daemon will not prevent its launch because the quarantine flags contains 0x40. Another situation is launching a trusted app. Only a single additional click is required to launch the notarized app. So let's make a summary. Regardless of whether the app is trusted or untrusted, at least an additional click is required to launch it. It is a nice security protection, effectively mitigates the one-click RCE attack surface. So a question, can we launch an executable file without modifying its quarantine flags? Yes. We can use an app folder that doesn't set the quarantine attribute to wrap the executable file. It is a nice feature I found. So if there is a vulnerability that allows us to create an app folder without quarantine attribute, can we use it to bypass the sandbox? Have a try, but failed. It appears that macOS applies different security policies based on the specific quarantine flags. If the quarantine flag is not equal to 86, the quarantined app is launchable. I believe the design of quarantine incorporates the concept of whether the user has permitted this operation. If the operation is authorized, any write operation to a file will be assigned a flag other than 86. The system will handle it in a softer way. But if the operation is not authorized, the system will use the strictest policies to handle this file. As we can see here, there are 4 different quarantine flags, like download, sandbox, hard, and user approved. Here is a demo of how Apple uses these quarantine APIs to generate the quarantine attributes. As we can see in the picture on the right, the quarantine kernel extension generates the attribute. So we need to analyze the quarantine kernel extension. The quarantine kernel extension is packed into the kernel cache. So we need to download the firmware first. The kernel cache is in IM4P format. So we need to use some scripts to extract its content. Here is a demo. After this, we can just use IDEA Pro to analyze the binary. A sandbox app is not allowed to modify files' quarantine attribute. And if the input flag doesn't contain 0x40 and the lower list 2 bytes are non-zero, the final quarantine flag is equal to input flag pipe 0x80. So 81, it means download. 82, sandbox. 83, sandbox plus download. 86, sandbox plus hard. If we try to launch a quarantined app which quarantine flag is equal to 86, quarantine kernel extension will block the operation because the operation is not authorized. So my hypothesis is correct. If we want to achieve SBX through launching a non-sandbox app, we need to do 2 things. 1, identify a vulnerability that allows the creation of an app folder without the quarantine attribute. 2, find a way to change the executable file's quarantine flag. Here is the first vulnerability can help us create an app folder without the quarantine attribute. On Apple platforms, there are 2 kinds of containers, application container and group container. Below macOS 15, the group containers of third-party apps are not protected and behave differently compared to iOS. Container Manager doesn't automatically create group containers for an app upon its first launch. They're only created when the user calls the API. And there is a path traversal vulnerability in group container folder creation process. The created folder isn't tagged with a quarantine attribute. The patch is simple. Now, the API only returns the URL and doesn't perform folder creation. Now, we need to focus on the second challenge. Actually, it spent me more time on the first one. In fact, macOS has significant issues when determining if an operation is user-approved. I will introduce 4 different routes to achieve this. Route 1, privilege entitlement. As long as the app declares the entitlement, any operation on files will be marked as a 2 quarantine flag, regardless of whether the app actually has read-write permissions for the downloads folder. This entitlement is widely used in mailing applications, such as Apple Messages, Apple Mail, WhatsApp, WeChat, and Telegram. So for these apps, we only need a vulnerability that allows the creation of arbitrary folders to achieve a SBX. Obviously, it has some limitations. Like Microsoft Word and many other applications don't declare the entitlement. So we need to find another way to exploit them. Here comes to route 2. We can abuse user-selected feature. So what is user-selected feature? If terminal attempts to open flag.txt with text edit, it will be denied because neither the requesting terminal nor the handling text edit has access to it. However, if we double-click flag.txt in Finder, text edit will be able to load the file correctly. This is because the user explicitly wants to use text edit to open flag.txt. So the operation system will fully grant file access to text edit. This is called user-selected feature. From a system design perspective, user-selected feature is one of the most powerful functions on Mac. Only root and SIP can limit its behavior. And the most important thing is the design of quarantine incorporates the concept of whether the user has permitted this operation. So, can we use the user-selected feature to change the quarantine flag? Yes. If an action is approved by the user, it will not be marked with quarantine flag hard. For example, if we receive a document in WeChat and then double-click it to open with Microsoft Word, Word will have full control over the document. Any subsequent file operations performed by Word on this document will be tagged with a 2 quarantine flag instead of a 6. So under macOS 14.0, if we want to escape from the Microsoft Word sandbox, we only need to inject the payload into the received document and set the previously created non-sandbox app's executable file as a symbolic link pointing to this modified document. Here is a demo. Open with Microsoft Word. As we can see, I have escaped from the Microsoft Word sandbox. I developed this exploit on August 20 last year during the transition between macOS 13 and macOS 14. After updated to macOS 14, the initial exploit steps still executed as expected, but the malicious non-sandbox app failed to launch. Why? Why was this happened? Just because macOS 14 introduced a new TCC, AppData. This was the first time I truly experienced the impact of security protections on exploit development. Below macOS 14, any non-sandbox process could access the private containers of any third-party app, such as WhatsApps and Telegrams. The new TCC effectively closes this attack surface. This is a nice security protection, and it makes the security of desktop operation system closer to mobile operation system. For example, if the executable file is a shell script, bin.sh would execute this script, but it doesn't have access to private container folder of WeChat, which would prevent the script from launching. But hold on, a question arises. Check the picture on the left first. If the executable file is a regular file, the hello.app is launchable. However, if the executable file is a symbolic link as shown in the picture on the right, the hello.app is unlaunchable. Why? The file hello is in the hello max private container folder too. So why can BingSH access it even it is protected by AppData TCC? Just because macOS has an exception rule for accessing directories ending in .app. If a path matches this pattern, all apps can directly access its contents, regardless of whether the directory is protected by TCC. Now, we cannot use the vulnerability to access files in some sensitive directories, but we can still launch apps from protected directories. It seems that Apple wants to keep the exception for launching apps. Now, we need to find another way to modify the quarantine flag. Here comes to route 3. We can abuse open file Apple events. User selected feature is a crucial feature. macOS should ensure that malicious applications cannot emulate click events or trigger the permission granting mechanism without user interaction. But if we execute open-a flag.txt, open-a app.id hello.txt, the operation will make the specific app open hello.txt. Subsequent operations on the input file will be treated as user approved and will tag the file with a2 quarantine flag instead of a6. So we only need to execute open-a Microsoft Word executable file and then inject the payload to the executable file. This operation changes the executable file's quarantine flag directly. Obviously, it has some limitations too. The exploit opens a new UI, so the attack is noticeable to the user, which is not ideal for weaponization. And if an application has not implemented the open file and open files interfaces, this method will not work. So is there a more general, silent, and weaponizable approach we can use? Yes, we can abuse Clipboard. We first discuss a flaw in Clipboard on macOS. The Clipboard component on macOS doesn't protect it. Every process can access a universal clipboard, including Sandbox apps. The copy operation on any file will share the file access with other processes. Therefore, if we are a Sandbox app, we can monitor the clipboard and modify the content if the copied item is a file. Here is a demo. I will use the malicious Sandbox step to steal and modify the copied item. The original content is flag. Just trigger the copy. As we can see here, the malicious Sandbox app has stolen the flag.txt. And the original content has been modified. The clipboard not only breaks the Sandbox restrictions, but also allows us to use macOS as a stepping stone to compromise iOS device. By abusing hands-off feature, we can monitor, hijack, and modify clipboard data on iOS. For example, if we want to modify the copied Bitcoin wallet address on iOS, do we need a iOS 0-day? No, we just need a macOS 0-day. If a hacker aims to steal data from your iOS device, but finds the attack surface too narrow, targeting macOS may provide a better solution. Therefore, if you use both macOS and iOS and own highly sensitive data, it is recommended to disable hands-off. macOS 15 introduces a new function, iPhone Mirror. The function sounds risky because take over my Mac could mean take over my iPhone silently. The demand for macOS 0-day exploits may increase in the future. And we can abuse the clipboard to achieve SBX because the copy operation are mistakenly assumed to have user consent. If a file has a quarantine flag of H6, we only need to copy this file and then modify its content. This operation directly changes its quarantine flag to H2. Now, I have achieved SBX through launching a non-Sandbox step. So let's make a summary. Traditionally, an arbitrary folder creation vulnerability is considered harmless and cannot lead to any exploitable outcome. However, on macOS, it is universal sandbox escape. I first discovered the arbitrary folder creation vulnerability and spent 2 weeks figuring out how to exploit it. So please do not ignore any useless vulnerabilities, especially when analyzing a new operation system. And I believe the system still contains many APIs that allow for unauthorized folder creation. So enjoy. Good luck for your bug hunting. Gurch found a SBX vulnerability too, and the answer is yes, but we need to do a bit more if we want to achieve a general sandbox escape. Now, I have achieved RCE, so let's talk about others. I want to talk about the AppData TCC because it hinders our previous exploit. But before that, we first need to understand a crucial permission granting mechanism on macOS. It is macAL. AppData TCC is based on macAL. So what does the macAL look like? For example, TextEdit doesn't have permission to access flag.txt, but if we double-click flag.txt in Finder, TextEdit gains access to flag.txt. So what happened? I believe a permission granting mechanism is at work here. Imagine that if we as a developer, there are 2 different ways to limit file access. 1, use a database to record who can access a file. 2, mark the file with some properties. The second one is most suitable for precise control over file access permissions. And upon analysis, macOS uses the second one. The operation system will tag the file with the macAL attribute, which contains all authorized processes that can access a file. Here is the first vulnerability, and the vulnerability had existed for years. Finder uses the default app to open the file based on its uniform type identifier, and macOS generates the macAL attribute to allow the default app to access a file. After this, Finder informs the app to open the file. For example, if we execute open-a TextEdit flag.txt, we will get an error. But if we execute open-a Finder flag.txt, TextEdit can open the file. So if we can replace the default file handler, we can trick Finder automatically granting our application access to any file when it opens the file. We can use this method to access a history.db of Safari, chat.db of messages, except we cannot access a tcc.db. The malicious app can register items in this way, and we can use the Swift default apps to change the default file handlers. Here is a demo. We don't have the FDA, and I will use the park.app to access the chat.db of messages. Success. As long as a file is tagged with macAL attribute, even if it is protected by TCC, a permitted app can still access the file. I plan to disclose more, but they're under patching, so I will disclose them in the future session. So in section 2, it's time to introduce the AppData TCC. When a Sandbox app launches, seek init daemon requests container manager daemon to create a private container folder based on its bundle ID. The data folder is the actual private container folder for the app. So how does our operation system generate the macAL attribute? I will take a dive into macAL based on macOS 14.5. Seek init daemon register the app container and apply macAL to the data folder. There are 2 different roles to generate the macAL attributes. 1, trusted process can access its private container folder. 2, apps developed by the same developer can access its private container folder. Here is a demo for route 1. As we can see here, we type can access WeChat's private container folder. For route 2, it will obtain the team ID of the launching Sandbox app and register exceptions that allow all apps and installation packages from the same team to access a folder. The Sandbox kernel extension handles the syscall. It has some verifications, and it will generate the macOS attribute based on different types. Here is a demo of type 2, type 3, and type 4. Actually, these macOS generation strategies are essentially similar, all involving SHA-256 hash calculations with some differences in the details. So now we have known that seq-init daemon grants launching Sandbox apps access to specific folders. 2, macOS can bypass all TCC or file TCC limitations. So if we can exploit AppData TCC, we can access arbitrary files with nearly FDA level permissions, except we cannot modify tcc.db. So here is the first vulnerability. If the data folder is a symbolic link, seq-init daemon will still update the destination folder's macOS attribute when the launching app's with the launching app's team ID. Now, if the data folder is a symbolic link, container manager will stop the operation. Here is a second vulnerability. The container manager first creates a temporary folder on the library staging folder. After creation, it renames the folder to the destination. But the library staging folder was not protected by TCC. So before renaming, we could replace the data folder with a symbolic link as shown. As a result, the victim folder would be tagged with the malicious Sandbox app's macOS attribute. Now, the staging folder is protected by TCC. The third vulnerability is a security patch bypass vulnerability, which allows us to bypass a patch for the previous 2 vulnerabilities. Apple patched this vulnerability 10 days ago, so now it is a 1-day vulnerability. The initialization process of the app's Sandbox container is very complex, involving many high-privilege processes and frameworks, such as seq-init daemon, app container, app sandbox, container manager daemon, and Sandbox kernel extension. Complicated often means bugs. First, seq-init daemon requests container manager daemon to create the app container folder. After this, it will request Sandbox kernel extension to update the macOS attribute of the data folder. And there is a timing window between the unprotected and protected status. We can exploit it. We can just monitor the data folder creation. Monitor the data folder creation. If found, replace it with a symbolic link. But at this time, container manager daemon prevents the launch of the malicious Sandbox app due to the patch. But seq-init daemon still requests Sandbox kernel extension to update the data folder's macOS attribute. As a result, the folder pointed to by the symbolic link has been assigned the macOS attribute. So currently, we cannot continue the exploit because of the patch will prevent the app from launching. However, a crucial detail is that the victim folder has been tagged with a malicious macOS attribute. So then we need to replace the symbolic link with a normal data folder so that the next time we launch the malicious Sandbox app, container manager daemon won't block it. After this, the malicious Sandbox app launch, but we will find that it cannot access the victim folder due to the Sandbox restrictions. If a Sandbox app wants to access some resources, Sandbox kernel extension will first check its Sandbox restrictions. If allowed, TCC daemon will check if the process has access to the protected folder. Therefore, when we compile the app, we need to register the SBPL to break the Sandbox restrictions. Here is a demo. We cannot access the library Safari folder now. Exploit. Failed. Sleep 10 seconds and try again. Success. As we can see here, we can access the library Safari folder now. Now, there are 3 relevant vulnerabilities. 2 of them has been patched, and the rest one is under patching, so I may disclose them later. In macOS 15, the group containers of third-party apps are protected by AppData TCC 2. Additionally, the library group container folder is not writable. A question: have you identified an attack surface in AppData TCC? The purpose of AppData TCC is to protect the data of third-party apps. Logically, this approach is sound because it has an allow list to limit access. Only trusted applications can access a protected container folder. But it doesn't provide developers with an option to create a block list. From a system design perspective, the purpose of an allow list is different from that of a block list. If you only have an allow list without a block list, what happens if a trusted app is no longer trusted? What happens? If any trusted application has an end-day vulnerability, the attacker can download the old version, achieve LPE, and then access the sensitive files of the latest app. A vulnerability that only affected specific versions has turned into a persistent issue that developers cannot fix. The developer can configure the allow list to limit who can access the folder, but it cannot block this exploit because whatever the configuration is, the Sandbox app itself can still access the private container folder. Even if the allow list works, it only compares the team ID in the allow list. The vulnerable old version of the Sandbox app has a valid team ID, so you cannot block its launch. So to red teams, we can connect these vulnerable old version apps. And to Apple, there are 2 suggestions. 1, create a block list. 2, if the current running app version is lower than the version that was last run, prompt the user with an alert. Actually, TCC daemon has a similar attack surface. Apple has introduced several security mechanisms, but this mechanism currently focuses mainly on the security of Apple's apps and don't yet cover third-party apps. Now, I have achieved RCE, and I can read-write arbitrary files, so I should talk about the root LPE, general TCC bypass, SIP bypass. Here is a demo of general TCC bypass on the latest macOS 15.0. We don't have the FDA and the camera TCC now. Exploit. The original TCC.b has been modified. Just take a picture, success, and check the access again. Terminal has the camera TCC now. I planned to disclose some relevant vulnerabilities, but they're under patching, so I will disclose them in the future session. Okay, now Flanker will make a summary and share some experience on other operation systems.
I will give a brief summary and the ideas of defense from a blue team's perspective, that how to detect or prevent this kind of attacks. And first, you can see that in your previous exploits, you use lots of sensitive APIs, such as the argument that contains directory traversal, the ... for the container URL for security application group identifier, and you can monitor this API's usage. However, due to the limitations of the SIP, you cannot do this detection on your employees' endpoints, and you have to do it in your sandbox, in your modified environment. For example, you have a dynamic sandbox in your corporation's mail gateway, and you can use it to detect if there is a malicious attachment that tries to exploit this vulnerability. And for the EDRs and the tools based on the endpoint security framework, you can monitor simple links to sensitive locations. So the takeaway for this talk that we found that arbitrary folder creation vulnerability on macOS is actually equivalent to finding a sandbox escape vulnerability, and the macL attribute feature, the security feature in the macOS and its usage and its vulnerabilities, and the newly introduced security feature, the AppData TCC, and everything you need to know about it and how we exploit it. And finally, we found that we can actually abuse end-day vulnerabilities in outdated version of third-party applications to bypass the TCC. And also, during our research, we compared the Apple's operating system with other operating systems such as Android and Huawei's new operating system, the Harmony OS Nest, on the privacy protection and the sandbox mechanism. Actually, Android uses two approaches for the sandbox, the MAC approach based on Linux and the DSA approach based on the user ID and group ID isolation, just like traditional Linux. And the Android application access to privacy and the sensitive information is enforced by an XML-based permission and a signature that application need to declare the access in the Android manifest, and they have to get the user's consent. And the sandbox processes, especially the Chrome renderer's sandbox process, it runs in the isolated context and has a very limited access to resources such as drivers, service, syscalls. And for attackers, if you want to escape like the Chrome sandbox, the isolated sandbox, you will have to attack the binder driver and some limited syscalls. Or you can attack the application relevant IPCs, for example, the Chrome IPCs from the host process to the renderer process or vice versa. So finally, there's a new operating system by Huawei, the Harmony OS Nest. It's actually a new operating system that is totally not Android or Linux. It has some new concepts for privacy protection and the sandbox, like the APL, the ability privilege level. In this operating system, the applications and permissions have three categories for their APL, the normal, system basic, and system core. And the permissions can be granted in two ways, the user grant and system grant. The user grant means that this permission needs to promote for user's consent, and the system grant means that this is a non-sensitive permissions and it can be automatically granted if allowed. And the permission requirement is that the application cannot apply for permissions that has higher APL levels. And this can be dynamically overridden by ACL if the permission has a declaration or attribute of ACL enable is true. But this requires a certain certificate and signing from the Huawei's App Store. For example, for the factory reset and the capture screen, this kind of very sensitive permissions. So this is our comparison with the other familiar and popular operating systems on this TCC-like mechanism and sandbox mechanism, and we hope that it could help the researchers to get similar insights in it. So I think that's our talk, and thank you for coming, and I think we can come to the QA session.